Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. And in this video, we take a look at an article from David Bristow, a communications expert, regarding the mobile phone evidence placing Jack Wombs on Workhouse Lane on the evening of December the 6th, 1995. It was ultimately this evidence, along with Darren Nichols' testimony in court, which convicted Michael Steele and Jack Wombs of the triple murders of Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe. Let's now start with this newspaper article from 2003. A mobile phone expert has told of the significant evidence that he believes removes one of the convicted killers from the scene of one of East Anglia's most notorious murders. David Bristow, one of the UK's leading mobile phone specialists, spoke of his research as Suffolk man Jack Wombs waits to hear if he is allowed to appeal against his convictions for killing 3 Essex drug barons. Wombs of Brockford near Stowmarket and Michael Steele are serving life sentences for the brutal murders of Patrick Tate, Craig Rolfe and Tony Tucker. The trio were found blasted to their deaths in a Range Rover on a secluded lane in Rettendon near Chelmsford in December 1995. Both Wombs and Steele of Angers Green near Great Bentley were convicted of the killings after a trial at the Old Bailey in 1998. Wombs, a mechanic, was placed at the scene of the crime, Workhouse Lane, by mobile phone records supported by evidence of Supergrass Darren Nichols, who claims he acted as the getaway driver. But Mr. Bristow said his independent tests, which he did for his own satisfaction and has not been paid for, put a question mark against the reliability of the mobile phone evidence and suggested Wombs was elsewhere around the time of the killings. He said, quote, "This is just one of several inconsistencies in the case, and I would like to see it reopened," he said. "I felt that the evidence, particularly the mobile phone cell data, wasn't examined properly. I got the impression it wasn't given the consideration it should have been. It is much more recognised now than it was then." Key evidence in the trial centred on 2 calls allegedly made by Wombs, which were picked up on 2 different cell phone masts just after the shootings. One of the calls, it is claimed, was from Wombs to Nichols, telling him to collect him and Steele from the lane. Prosecutor Andrew Mundy QC told the jury that Wombs must have been in an area overlapped by the 2 transmitters, and Workhouse Lane was in that area. But Mr. Bristow said his research showed that only one of the transmitters at Ingatestone was within range at the scene. He managed to retrieve Wombs' phone from the Essex police to carry out the stringent tests and even waited for similar weather conditions to the day of the killings. "I made around 60 calls at various places and heights up and down the lane, and not one of those calls was routed through the second cell site at Hockley, which the prosecution said was within range," said Mr. Bristow. "I just don't think Jack Wombs could have been in Workhouse Lane when he made that call." His explanation was that he had been to the Wheatsheaf pub in Rettendon to pick up a car for Nichols and tried to call from there. He would have been in a range of both cell sites whilst at the Wheatsheaf pub. Specialist Mr. Bristow supplied mobile phone evidence that helped convict former Malden man Stuart Campbell of the murdering of his niece Danielle Jones, and has recently been a prosecution witness at the Soham murder trial. He was originally part of Wombs' defence team at the 1998 Old Bailey trial, and unconvinced by the verdict, personally took up the case. "For my own satisfaction, I did a whole series of tests using Jack Wombs' phone, not just any phone. I didn't feel it was appropriate to charge for it. I felt the facts at the trial fitted the defence case rather than the prosecution's story. If you look at the prosecution and the defence cases, the defence was much more plausible. Wholmes and Steele have both protested their innocence of the crimes, claiming Nichols fabricated his story. Their cases are currently being examined by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is expected to make a decision shortly on whether to allow them to go to the Court of Appeal. Previous bids to appeal against the convictions have been denied. Essex police refused to comment on the new evidence. Okay, so hopefully that should have given you a clear idea of exactly what this expert was saying here. He actually performed many tests with Jack Wholmes' own mobile phone. He waited for similar weather conditions as to that of December the 6th, 1995. And he did quite a series, up to 60 test calls, to actually gather some data to see exactly how credible Jack Wholmes' version of events really was. It is also worth remembering that David Bristow is someone who is well renowned in the field of telecommunications. He is a well-respected person and someone who has actually worked on numerous murder trials and numerous criminal cases regarding the use of telephone data. Also worth mentioning is that he wasn't actually paid for carrying out these tests. It was more of a curiosity for David Bristow to actually see if what Jack Wholmes was saying could actually be verified in some way. When he conducted these tests, he actually used Jack Wholmes' own mobile phone and made up to around 60 calls from the lane itself, yet not one of those calls actually connected to the second transmitter. Now, what I want to actually bring your attention to, or bring your attention back to, are the actual phone calls from Darren Nichols on December the 6th. Not just a phone call to his voicemail box where he was supposedly at the wheat sheaf at the time, but also the call from Jack Wholmes. Now, with Darren Nichols' phone data, we also have him pinging off of two separate transmitters. Now, when you think about this in a different way to the actual narrative which was put forward by the prosecution, as in, really Jack Wholmes must be guilty because his phone was picked up on the lane, it connected to that transmitter. This is the reason that we can basically say with a great deal of certainty that he was in the lane on the evening of their murders. When we actually look at Darren Nichols' version of events, what actually makes his version of events any more credible than those of Jack Wholmes? Now, we know that Darren Nichols connected to two transmitters, but we don't exactly know where Darren Nichols was during these time periods. It was also interesting that when Darren Nichols made the short trip past the lane and took one of the left-hand turnings onto Meadow Road, where he supposedly then received a phone call from Jack Wholmes to go and collect both himself and Michael Steele, David Bristow actually looked at this evidence and didn't believe that he would have been in Meadow Road during that phone call. Now, what is actually worth mentioning is that these phone calls, this cell data, these pings onto the transmitters cannot actually give us an exact location as to where either of these three individuals are. It can only give us an approximate place in which they were during the times that these phone calls were actually made. What is interesting is that the two phone calls that I spoke about in a previous video, which were made on December the 6th from Michael Steele to Jack Wholmes just after 6 p.m, these phone calls appear to have been completely overlooked by David Bristow and certainly weren't looked into. These phone calls, I believe, could shed a lot of light onto the credibility of Darren Nichols' version of events or Jack Wholmes' potential innocence. The next piece that I am going to read out to you is the actual submission to the Criminal Cases Review Commission regarding David Bristow's findings on the mobile phone evidence. Report of David Bristow regarding mobile telephone evidence dated the 1st of the 5th, 2002. The Criminal Cases Review Commission are presently reviewing the case of Michael Steele, who with Mr. Jack Wholmes has been convicted of murder. In January 2002, Mr. N.J. Price, the case review manager, posed a question relating to mobile phone evidence given at the trial. Given the evidence you, David Bristow, gave at the trial regarding the effect on telephone signals of foliage, to what degree are your original findings enhanced by the latest tests carried out under similar foliage conditions? I've addressed this point within this report. In my opinion, any effects of foliage on the transmission between a mobile phone used in Workhouse Lane and the Hockley cell site would have been very small compared with the effects of a significant hill which is directly in the line of sight between the 2 points. My subsequent tests under foliage conditions similar to those at the time of the murder confirmed the results of the tests which I made before the trial. In my opinion, my earlier findings are enhanced. in that any doubt as to the validity of the earlier tests as a consequence of differing foliage conditions has been eliminated. Mr. Price also posed the question, to what degree are your original findings enhanced by the use of Mr. Wome's mobile phone compared to the equipment used in the tests before the trial? I had always believed that the best way to carry out the test was to use Jack Wome's own phone, but this was not possible before the trial. My original results were carried out with equipment which I acknowledge might not respond to the different levels of service provided by the local cell sites in the same way as a mobile phone. In my opinion, my original findings have been enhanced by the subsequent use of a mobile phone to make test calls and assistance of Vodafone to analyse the test results. The validity of the test results is further enhanced by the use of Jack Wome's actual phone. I maintain the view that the use of the Hockley 54/3 cell identity is consistent with the suggestion by the defence that Jack Wome's phone was used at the wheat sheaf, but not consistent with the prosecution assertion that at 18:59 on December 6, 1995, the phone was used in Workhouse Lane. Okay, so what is interesting there is the fact that they didn't actually have the ability to use Jack Wome's mobile phone to test this theory before the trial began. Also, obviously, David Bristow was using his own equipment during or before the trial, I should say, and the evidence that he put forward would have been a little bit more flimsy as he couldn't use Jack Wome's own mobile phone at the time in order to carry out those tests. What's also interesting is that they gave this data and these test results to Vodafone to actually analyse them separately, and clearly they both came back with the same answer. The Jack Wome's was more than likely at the wheat sheaf and not actually on Workhouse Lane during the time that this call was made. Now, the problem we have with the cell site data, the cell records, the transmitter details, any of the tests that were carried out, is that we cannot say with the greatest deal of accuracy, as in within a few feet, as to where these three individuals actually were stood during these telephone calls. It can only give us a rough estimation. The interesting part, however, is that the data and the tests show, according to David Bristow, that it was more than likely that Jack Wome's was actually telling the truth and he was actually at the wheat sheaf during the time that that call was actually made. Or at least in his opinion, it was more credible than the story put forward by the prosecution that Jack Wome's was on Workhouse Lane. It is also worth remembering as I bring this video to a close that we also have Darren Nichols' version of events for December the 6th, and the fact that his phone actually pings off of two separate transmitters as well. We need to be asking ourselves what exactly makes his version of events more credible than those of Jack Wome's. If you would like to learn more about the Range Rover murders as told in court, then please click on the video in front of you now. You'll also see the Essex Boys playlist, which has an array of separate videos regarding this case in one convenient folder. Many thanks for joining me for this video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.